for joining us today. This is the first ever Agri-Food Connect webinar as part of the series that we are working on with our local partners all around the globe. We are kicking off with the Turkey and MENA region, and we are starting off with Lebanon in collaboration with Antwork today, which is quite exciting for us. We've been looking into getting ready for this series because food sector as its own has a lot to say with the crisis ongoing in hand, and all of the partners and the players within that sector and the ecosystem are working on to adapt to what's going on in the world and what is the new normal. So we've been thinking through and working on how we can actually build a collaboration within globally for startups, companies, startup ecosystem players as such, Antwork, that how we can connect all of these great players together and work on the solutions. So I would like to, thank you, all of you attending today, and also thank you so much, Aisha, for your time. It's great to, start off with Antwork, great to start it off with you, and thank you so much for, joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Sami.
Awesome. So I'll dive right in. As we mentioned, this is about connecting agriculture food sector together and talking about adaptations that we have throughout the world and how we can, to raise the voice of the solutions. Before we go in right in, I would like to talk about really briefly about who we are as Kök Projekt and what do we work on. So to do that, let me share my screen. So, as I mentioned, our organization named Kök Projekt. Maybe some of you know and some of you don't. I'll just explain it really briefly. In a traditional sense, we are an accelerator and a corporate innovation partner that only works for food, agriculture, and water sector. What we do is that we work with startups, we work with companies, and we work on empowering the food entrepreneurship all across the globe. We have a headquarters based in Istanbul, but we have local partners all across the globe and working for the startups all around. And what we do, in short, I would love to, I love to explain it through this visual because it says it all. We touch every step of the food agriculture value chain, and we work with governmental organizations, NGOs, and companies, depending on how we can create, impact and benefit for startups, for the food and agriculture sector, and also support the sustainability for the future of food. So let's dive in. What is the Agri-Food Connect program? What is it in its core? So as I mentioned, all of us across the globe are working on adapting to the new normal. What it is, it's still uncertain. Is it us just being at home? Is it us changing our habits, changing our consumption habits, production habits? Everything is on the verge to change, and the food sector, it's up there as well. So we figured, how can we create a virtual collaboration all across the world and helping startups being able to provide their solutions from geographies that maybe they're not allowed to travel at the point, but how we can create the conversation, the global conversation on change and for the new normal of the future of food. So the program itself contains a series of webinars, such as like this today, as we talk about focusing on adapting the new solutions and how we can adapt to the crisis and what are we expecting in the future for the future of food. The second step will be an upcoming sprint, which we will do in collaboration again with Antwork and also with our other local partners. And the idea is to bring together companies and startups, work on problem fields and coming up with the solutions that can be adapted to their value chain. So we are looking into how we can matchmake the startups with the companies online and how they can develop and adapt these solutions that they are working on. The second step will be, we will be selecting the top teams from that sprint, and we will be working together with them on an agile mentorship program. What it does is that we're going to work on their products and solutions, their teams, and their portfolio, and how we can support them, to become the startups that come up with the solutions. And then the next step will be an acceleration program that is designed for those startups as well. So if you guys want to, find out more about Kök Projekt or stay in the loop, or finding out about our reports and other activities, you can just log into our website, which is kökprojekt.com. We also have a Slack group that has food and agriculture representatives, startups, and also ecosystem players pretty much all across the globe. We're still in the beta phase, but all you have to do is just log into our website, click in, and you're already there. So we are working on to empowering this digital community to connect together and stay together as well. So you can just log in to our website and do that as well. So today's topic is the Agri-Food Connect. And as I mentioned, we are kicking off in collaboration with Antwork. And today we have Aisha with us, and I would like to give the microphone to her to hear about what is Antwork and what is your role in there, and especially your experience and your expertise in the agri-food sector as well. Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Sami. Yeah, can you guys hear me well? So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining from all over the world. I'm seeing people from Hong Kong, Turkey, and Lebanon, just to say the least. So really lovely to have you here. At Antwork, we're a co-working space provider, which means we collaborate with real estate owners to operate their spaces into co-working spaces. We have several spaces, currently 3 operational in Lebanon, and in the end of 2019 we just launched in Cyprus. We were just about to step into Jordan and Saudi Arabia and the upcoming market timeline, but we had to stop a little bit and step back due to COVID-19. But this challenge for COVID-19 has been for everyone. I'll talk about that later, but I also wanted to briskly go over my experience in entrepreneurship. With Antwork, I work as the programs and research lead. We do a lot of collaborations, such as the one that we're having with Kök Projekt, on empowering various entrepreneurship sectors and subsectors in Lebanon. We've done a few collaborations with the healthy and niche food entrepreneurship sector and industry in Lebanon, working with small entrepreneurs, which are really such a pleasure to work with, so innovative and so passion driven, namely with the Cloud9 Food Hub. I don't know if anyone's watching from there. My experience in entrepreneurship spans with over 9 years in the MENA region, not just in Lebanon, but also in Cairo and Amman. And I've previously worked with the main player in agri-food and agri-tech entrepreneurship in Lebanon to date, which is Veritech and the Agri-Tech program. So also good evening to anyone attending. The challenges with agri-food, the way I see it compared to other entrepreneurship, is that it's really a very sensitive value chain. You can't just come up with something on the computer and make it work in many ways. If you're going to drive impact, there needs to be disruption across the different value chains, and that's for different key stakeholders to indulge. But it's always been fascinating to look at agriculture and agri-food entrepreneurship, because not only is it solving a social disruption and addressing food security, but it's also very innovative and yet to be disrupted.
Absolutely. I would like to actually, would love to hear your thoughts and extending that, your experience and your expertise with also talking about, for our diverse, participants, the Lebanese ecosystem, especially how it's been positioned, in the Levantine region, because you also have, through Antwork and also through your expertise, the experiencing the Jordanian ecosystem, Egyptian, and also the region. So how do you position the Lebanese ecosystem, comparing to the other countries in the region?
So in the big picture, for entrepreneurship, Lebanon has been kind of in the middle lately over the past 2 years. It was kind of quite excelling in the previous years between 2016, 2018. Things with the recession economically kind of slowed down the number of deals and the number of growth of the startup ecosystem. It was a brave new world when we were starting with the support for the knowledge economy sector and entrepreneurship across different sectors by the central bank. Over time, that's been really disputed whether it's been sustainable or impactful, but definitely it's had its heyday and now it's a bit challenging. But no matter, as a Lebanese sort of startup ecosystem, we've gotten accustomed over the years to also establish sub-entities, and you will rarely find like a healthy Lebanese startup, unfortunately, that's strictly balanced or based out of Lebanon. Many have entities in different markets, including the Turkish market, Dubai, Cyprus, a Delaware company, Estonia, etc. And that is a chunk of conversation to talk about in the tech sector. But however, you will always find that the Lebanese entrepreneurs make up a good margin of the startup ecosystem in markets that are more cosmopolitan, like the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Right.
So it's there. The talent is excellent. There's an ease of access to market because the product and the business models tend to be kind of very replicable. Lebanon is known to be a good test market because it's small. However, the challenges that we're currently facing have gotten us into full entrepreneurship spirit, whereby we are thinking of how to be lean, how to be agile, and what other steps can we take despite the current challenges. As maybe some of you know from our audience, Lebanon has been having an economic crisis. So it's been a challenging time for entrepreneurs, and I think this is why it's a prime time to address, not just with the COVID-19, but with this situation, to address with international partners such as Kök Projekt, what kind of collaborations and access and networks linkages can we do?
Absolutely. That's one of the goals that we have throughout the all of the collaboration that we're working on. But there's also the regional collaboration for startups being able to adapt every solution they come up with, if it's possible, to adapt to the different regions and the different countries. Because as you mentioned, the food and agriculture sector is also a common ground for all of us. When we're talking about production, consumption. It's quite related to all of us. It's not just divided by the borders, but we're also part of a global ecosystem when we're talking about food. And that's what is, as you mentioned, it's hard to come up with, solutions, because it's not just like tech or fintech. It's a totally different animal by its own and by its own metrics and by its own formation. So that's why it's quite important to develop these collaborations so that we can understand how we can, turn it to better. And that always brings, the topic of new normal, right? Because yes, we had, quite a lot of, challenges prior to all of this crisis, but now it's part of the, as you mentioned, the entrepreneurial spirit on its own, because we want to come up with the solutions. So if I, do the screen share again and dive into today's topic really quick, this is the topic that we were going to talk about, the new normal. So what is, the entrepreneurs are going to face, and how actually a long-lasting, change of habits, change of interest, change of demand will affect the food sector as well. And that brings the entrepreneurial spirit, because it's also, comes down to the actions of entrepreneurs that creates actually the real change. It's important to involve, every player's role, but the spark it's also the entrepreneurial spirit. Even if it comes from, from a company or a different organization, it's always that spirit and its core creates the change. So, today's topics, as we discussed, is the, first of all, the new normal. So what are we seeing? What are going to the norms that we're going to experience? And also, what are the challenges, the trends, and the opportunities? And from there, we can also, again, I would love to, have your feedback on each of the topics as we go through, and that your, experience with the Lebanese ecosystem, and is there any startups that you would like to, talk about? Feel free to go ahead as well. So, for example, if we look into the positives, in short, we're seeing, huge interest on contactless delivery. Like every company who's working on food delivery, grocery delivery, are developing this contactless service. And they want to move into this field. Even if they do groceries or food, they want to become contactless. So taking out the human aspect from the equation. We're seeing a huge interest on processed foods. What that means is that, as we see and do the research, is that because of the fears of stocking, and also, fears of food shortages for the food security topic as well, is that a lot of people are actually preferring processed foods, canned foods, to actually stock it at home, rather than, for a couple of months ago, the fresh food, organic, and all of these taglines were more important. And also, which is another, surge in there, is the food media. We are seeing a lot of, now content, a lot of videos, and also interest on cooking, baking bread, making some pastries, to either, spend some time, but it's also, relaxing as a stress release hobby as well. Which, based on the conversations I have, people around the world, they keep saying there's no yeast. So all of these markets are, running out with yeast. So
it sounds like food media and entertainment to me, like a combination of that.
Exactly. So how do you see the, the Lebanese ecosystem are adapting to that? Like, how is the change of habits? Is there any, companies or startups that, caught your attention that you would like to talk about? Any big companies adapting, in a great way, or do you want to talk about any of that in Lebanon?
I feel like the Lebanese as a customer is very ready to adapt to advances in the food business sector, especially when it comes to contactless, when it comes to upgrading regulations related to safety and hygiene, and that front. I've been actively seeing this, like, from the present moment right now. But in addition, I've also been reading up about what's going on for the activity in the sector here in Lebanon, but also in the region. And I've noticed, I think, just normally and compared to a lot of other markets, a huge surge in last mile logistics and in not peer-to-peer, but last mile logistics services, whether they're just for packaged foods or bulk foods, wholesale, but also for delivery from already existing retail spaces.
Right.
I've also noticed that there's an emerging conversation about, of course, we've all heard about the work from home and the hashtag work from home concept.
Right. Stay home. Hashtag stay home is all right. Yeah.
I just found out today that actually a friend of mine, he has a startup in Egypt called Mums, and what they do is they have home prepared foods that are delivered to houses and for business events. Right. So all these work from home agri-food startups are also becoming quite interesting. So maybe that goes into urban farming and microgreens. Absolutely. It's to set up your own food stations at home on your balcony, something that works for your work-life balance. So these things are also emerging. Mm-hmm. It's been not just in Lebanon, but in the region. Over time, contactless is going to surge. Right now, we are starting to see the first effects in the last mile logistics part. But I think as we go outside and start engaging after being in lockdown, and this is a kind of our direct contact with our environment related to food, I don't know how it's going to be like. I'm imagining more automation of the retail experience when it comes to groceries and accessing food. I'm also seeing that food as a concept will just become more dominant on the regular social media and media platforms. But I also would like to listen to the audience on their reflections, because probably they're in the industry are curious about it a little bit more.
Absolutely, absolutely. So regarding that, as Aisha mentioned, if you have any comments or questions regarding that, please feel free to leave that out on the chat section or the Q&A section, and we'll dive into that as well. But yeah, exactly. Contactless is becoming one of the main themes of when we're talking about food delivery and also the core of the food service. One of the reports that I was looking into, it's a bit old, probably I need to some updates on that, but it says in the region there are around 120 food delivery startups. This was from last year. So this food delivery within the MENA region, and also in Turkey, it's quite active. And also the groceries as well. Now we're adding contactless into the picture. But as you mentioned, I think it's also a great time for small scale, food delivery startups being able to create, novel products and novel concepts to be sent out to the people's homes or, home offices. So I think that's a great time for that as well. I definitely agree. And if we move in to the negatives that we see is it's easy to say that, like food service, it's having a really rough time at the moment. We're seeing, restaurants and cafes are closed and they are moving towards the possible economical crisis as a sector as well, which is a change that is being expected maybe in 5 to 10 years, but it's been shrinked into 2 months. And it's also quite hard for all of these companies and restaurants to adapt to that. But as you mentioned, a lot of restaurants are actually trying out to sending out food instead of having people to come in, because it's still not allowed, but it is expected to be continued like that after the lockdown measures are being more relaxed. As you mentioned, retail is one of the, seeing the negative effect with the crisis. I'm not talking about, of course, the big brands. I'm talking about really small scale brands, small scale, brick and mortar shops, or people are not, moving towards to ordering food, ordering groceries rather than going out, which is a surge in the online grocery services. And lastly, agriculture. Agriculture by its own, it's a huge topic for sure when we dive into the crisis, especially when we're looking into, creating a contactless agriculture value chain. It's a topic by its own. Like, how is it possible? How much of automation we can adapt, and how long will it take to do that? We're gonna dive into that in the, afterwards in a couple of minutes. But as we see, these are the negatives all across the world that has been seeing, and probably these are going to be the major sectors will have the shift, and probably a lot of startups going to move into this field within this sector. And if we move in to the contactless delivery again, as you mentioned, the groceries, and also which was deemed to as a unsuccessful business model, which is the meal kits, and now are seeing a possible surge. It's still up early to say there's going to be a surge, but people are, as you mentioned, consuming more food media. We are watching more food videos, and we are looking into ways to actually replicate this food. So meal kits will probably have their, have their shine again. And also, lastly, the ready meals. So is there any, like startups, or do you think any, companies that come up to your mind regarding, meal kits, or any novel service that you came up with? Anything you want to, discuss about that? Or do you think, the food delivery will be stay in its same place after the crisis will, go away eventually. So what is your thoughts on that?
For me, I'm not particularly aware of any surging activity in meal kits, ready to prepare meal kits. I think that I know about some international models like Blue Apron, but I haven't seen that kind of adapted here. You either get the food ready done or you order things. But what I've seen as an opportunity is that is the fact of reach of last mile logistics companies. The more localized the last mile delivery logistics company is,
Right.
the cheaper the service perhaps, or the more accessible. So I've seen such a wide opportunity for small localized, city-based last mile logistics companies to come and experiment and deliver a service. That's becoming more trustworthy. So people are more willing to experiment and to kind of nudge into trying new solutions. That's on Contactless. Contactless is a positive, negative conversation, but what's also going to become contactless, on the point that you mentioned, is agriculture. And you mentioned previously in our conversations things related to, drone technology and contactless agriculture methods. That's one thing to address, but the other thing to address in our region, which is strategic, maybe in addition to contactless and safety precautions, is going to have to be food security. Food security is super sensitive.
Absolutely.
It's going to be, it's an emergency. There's probably the rate of poverty, people living under the poverty line in Lebanon, has increased to over 51% rapidly in the past 6 months. We are having issues with imports, and when we're importing, it's dollars that we can't afford or don't have access to.
Right.
So the chain is broken. And more, we're going to have to try to invent more localized value chains on accessing food, water, and agriculture. I'm looking at the participant list, and I already see someone, I think it's Guadam from Profine. Thank you for joining us. He is addressing food security in a different way. I don't know, maybe Guadam, can you write in the comments what your business model is trying to tackle?
Awesome.
And yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? What kind of prospects do you see in terms of addressing food security?
I mean, absolutely. I totally agree with you, because it's part of the bigger conversation, because the food security has been there for the last I would say when you take a look at from the angle of startups, from 2014, with all the merge of Bayer and Monsanto, and then we have the Paris Climate Agreement, the world has become more aware with the issues of climate change, food security, and agriculture technology. So it started, and now we are in the verge of an actual food crisis all across the globe, because it was always a part of a conversation that is happening either small parts or somewhere, or small parts of the same country, etc. But now it's a bigger conversation, because it's impossible to talk about with all the precautions, and impossible to talk about imports and export. And now we're looking into potential solutions. Regarding agriculture, the vertical farming, urban farming was becoming a thing, which was up there with the future of agriculture as the tools and solution. But now it's definitely become part of it, with the idea of how we can produce this food without having anyone to touching it. So that created the need that came with the crisis. So we are having a mistrust or some sort of like a fear that we can attract the potential virus from the produce itself. So that created a demand for actually agriculture startups to show that how much of hygiene is integrated to their value chain. So that's also great opportunity for startups to come up and say, we're doing the the most hygienic food production, most automated, etc. So I think it's creating a quite important opportunities. But regarding food security, looking into potentials as such, alternative protein, alternative meats, and how we can, create more and damage less, and this kind of like value propositions are becoming part of a bigger conversation. So I find it absolutely interesting and sort of like, if I can say, like, exciting, because this shift with the agriculture, with the food, was expected in 10 years. The whole conversation was about 10 years. I like vividly remember back in February or so when I had this conversation with, one of the major players in the ecosystem. He was mentioning, food and agriculture is the job for the future, but we're not in that future yet. And in 40 days, we are now. Like, we are like right now we are like in 40 days we just shifted into the future. So it's interesting as well. There's a question from chat from Sanem. She mentions, are either of you or your organizations in a position to offer mentorship to small retailers on how to pivot and change their business plans? So do you think could be a program that is managed or facilitated or supported by Antwork? Could that be happening? Do you see that happening? What would be your thoughts?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Is it Sanem? Salim. Thanks, Salim, for your question. Salim, I don't know where you're based out of, but definitely please do reach out to us in the email. We're gonna, maybe if we can share our emails at the end from Turkey. Salim, it's still relevant whether you're in Turkey or in Lebanon or anywhere in the world. Please reach out to us. Not only have we been addressing how retails can go, from offline to online, if this is the intervention point that you're talking about, through our partners, because one of our spaces, one of the Antwork spaces, is focused on e-commerce businesses and getting businesses from offline to online. We have relevant education programs and support programs on that. But we are also right now just starting the conversation from this first webinar into gathering and identifying what are your needs, what are the expertise that we need to kind of bring to the table to help drive business collaboration through different markets, but also through our different markets, but also getting understanding where you are and what are your challenges in your businesses and moving you forward to the next steps. In Lebanon, we do have a few resources that we can outreach through our partners, such as Beritech. So yeah, just take our emails and just reach out to us, for you and for everyone attending.
Awesome. We will be sharing our emails, as you mentioned, and we will be sharing more details after when we finalize the webinar as well. And Gautam has mentioned that they provide remote farm monitoring and risk resiliency using space and machine learning technologies. It's awesome. What's the name of Gautam's startup? To give it a shout. Profind. Awesome.
It's Profind, yeah.
Profind. Great. Then we can move into agriculture, actually. So I'm going to do another screen share, just a sec. So when we talk about, the agriculture being, in the verge of change, we're seeing the same attitude as we discussed. The contactless is the key now. Anything you have contactless right now, today's day, is almost like, blockchain and Bitcoin were 2 years ago. Maybe it's a bit stretch as an example, but I see the same, interest on the agriculture technologies and food production at the moment. So we're seeing, three main topics regarding contactless agriculture. One of which, drones, as we discussed. Drones are there to identify the potential diseases and tracking the production, any sort of like a problem to tackle and providing solutions. Automation has been part of that conversation for years, and now we're seeing a surge in the sensor technologies, automation technologies, agriculture technology startups. So it's there to stay for sure. So we're looking into an automated future for the agriculture. One of the interesting facts about agriculture all across the world is the age of producers are currently actually 57. So automation is definitely part of the future of agriculture, to adapting these technologies and providing more sustainable, but is also more efficient food production. And lastly, blockchain, which is the high interest, topic, and it always comes up with the question, but how? And blockchain is there definitely to stay for tracking, understanding the value chain, and potentially managing any sort of like a problem within. If I just talk about really briefly some of the charts that explains that. In collaboration with Patent Effect, I definitely urge and recommend to participants to check out their website as well. So Patent Effect is also a startup that looks into the patents and technology within various sections, various sectors. So we collaborate with them on our weekly reports, and one of the reports, the graphics they share with us, was actually the published drone patents for agricultural use. So as I mentioned, this has been seen a surge with the automation from the 2014, and now probably we're going to see more drones being integrated to the agricultural value chain. Excuse me. So, and then the second one, when we talk about blockchain, we're seeing a similar shift. As I mentioned, agriculture is now like blockchain 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, we've seen an amazing surge with the blockchain technologies all across the sectors, and agriculture was one as well. So a lot of companies, startups moved into this field to applying and developing technologies to be applied to the agri-food sector. Incidents in food poisoning and also tracking the quality of production is quite important topic for blockchain. And now we are adding, hygiene into the equation. So we're definitely going to see a lot of blockchain integration over I'm going to say over the 5 years, but with the, the speed of change that we have in this sector, maybe we'll see it in the more shortened notice. And then last, I would like to talk about the opportunities. We talked about it throughout our webinar, but as we discussed, contactless food definitely is there. Anything we add the tagline of contactless, it's definitely here to stay. This is going to be probably our way of life now. Being able to understand the food we ate and where it's come from and how it's been produced, but how much of contact it received. Food delivery for sure, as we discussed, here to stay. Processed foods is also an interesting topic because, as we discussed, there's a lot of interest to buy and stock more processed foods, but we are also looking into potential healthy food, healthy processed foods, healthy alternatives of consumer packaged goods, and coming up more and more more positive and more less less sugary and more healthy for you taglined consumer packaged goods, because as we are all staying at home, we're all snacking. We're consuming probably more than I would say junk food than we used to. As this is based on the feedback that I received from a lot of people. I know from my perspective, I'm consuming a lot of junk food compared to the 2 months ago. So I think
we all are. Don't worry.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Evening activities.
Exactly. It's part of the day, snacking. So I think the healthy alternatives of that, of snacking, will come up in one point, because our attitude towards healthy living was there, and it was there to stay. So I think we're gonna come up with this with demanding more healthy snacks and healthy drinks and healthy CPG products. And agri-tech, as we discussed throughout our talk, agri-tech is going to be here to stay, definitely going to change the whole value chain by its core, and we're going to see a lot of adaptations in technology. So let me stop share. Yeah.
I just want to share a little bit of inspiration before we move off that slide on processed foods. Previously, through Agri-Tech, I've seen some very interesting food concepts coming out of, or food businesses coming out of their accelerator cohorts in the earlier phases. One was related to bio-packaging, so the waxing material for fruits, like a bio product that is completely 100% organic, used to prolong the shelf life of fruits without using chemicals and any hazards of chemical toxins and chemical material in the food. And another thing that's also in conversation is, as you mentioned, like packaging that are related, like how can we reduce plastic, how can we increase shelf life without using any chemical materials, maybe resorting to vacuum, sous vide, or to other non-hazardous material for the environment, because climate change and clean startups are also just as relevant. There is definitely a merge with agri-food.
Absolutely, 100% agree. Like, for example, I was having a similar conversation just recently. 2 months ago, we have been seeing, quite a shift from plastics, banning the plastic bags from the supermarkets, banning potential, unnecessary plastic use within the, anywhere part of our life. Talking about market shelves without any plastic, was it be possible just to put it in your bag, pay it and leave, etc. We were talking about, new plastics economy and how we can, create life. And then, with the beginning of March, it just went out a window. And now pretty much we are consuming, I don't have the numbers, but I'm pretty sure we're consuming more plastic compared to, last year for sure, with all the gloves and the mask, because we have to. For sure. This is not open to discussion, absolutely. But it's easy to see that shift so quick because we were quite, aligned, throughout the world about, we need to omit this much of plastic use. We need to change this, either the materials or the use. And now it just became part of our, health, that consuming this much plastic. So any startup, coming up with more sustainable materials, gloves and masks, or even similar equipments to be used, I think, as you mentioned, could be quite effective, especially for the environment, for the world as well. Based on the startup you mentioned, absolutely, that's one of the, I definitely agree with the key issues, because, when you talk about processed food, it's safe in a way to keep, but nothing replaces fresh food in that manner. So being able to store longer times the fresh food in the shelf, in the fridge, or anywhere, it's just highly important. For example, having a curfew for 4 or 5 days, and being able to have this sort of like fresh food that is being protected by natural protectants, if that's the right word, protectant. It's quite important, and it's quite real if you think about it, like having been able to have that same freshness over the course of the days, because you're not actually being able to leave the house and buy more. So this kind of a like shift of need also creates, as you mentioned, biochemical startups opportunity to come up with, these solutions. There was one startup that just reminded me, based on what you said as well. They were on the news in here. They developed sort of like a spray for fruits and vegetables, and sort of like a natural cleaning agent for any of the doubts that you would have regarding the any contamination.
Infecting the foodstuffs, maybe, or for all products?
No, for the fresh food. That was the initial value proposition for the fresh food. You've probably seen the same. I've seen a lot of my friends are, coming at home, emptying their bags to their, showers or their, sink, and then, cleaning everything with the soap, even if it's a banana or celery or I don't know, canned tuna.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So this kind of a, habit, and being able to, adjust to this kind of like a lifestyle, creates this, opportunity to, I'm even like, I was thinking, when I was watching news, it would be great, because even if you have some doubts in your, in your mind, you can just spray that, and you believe it's clean, and then now you can move ahead consuming it. So this kind of an opportunities are, I believe, there to stay. But what is your take? Do you think this is going to be, are we still going to talk about this in a year? or is it going to be
Yes,
just?
absolutely. I've been reading a lot about the state of workspaces because I'm in the industry of workspaces, and definitely now with this, with the abrupt situation of the COVID-19, social distancing precautions, everything is happening suddenly, but they are proving, I mean, there is proof that this work from home method is not really putting businesses at risk. Some businesses are resuming, but also maybe prospering, reducing expenses.
Right.
So there will be a longer shift into this work from home culture, this remote culture, which means that a lot of people will probably be comfortable with kind of getting outside of the urban setting where it's very expensive, very congested, to places that are probably more affordable, more spacious, cleaner, and they will be staying in places a bit remotely for longer periods.
Right.
Does that mean that people are going to be consuming in bulk more? Yes. Does that mean that shelf life for food it needs to be considered? Yes. That also introduces urban farming, vertical farming, just kind of things that work in the localization of food value chains.
Right.
So these are things to review. Absolutely.
So we are actually, I mean, with this way, we are actually moving towards actually the future of work then, when you talking about, like the corporates are not, everybody's staying at home now, everybody's working at home if they can, of course. We're not doing all of us in the same jobs for sure. But, if you're, stay home working, and if it's going to be the future, so what is the future of work for you now? So what is the future of office? When you were talking about all of these, vertical farming, etc., I'm imagining, instead of having, one building for one company, having, diverse, several small locations that has all of these, small technologies, producing our food, sort of like a moving, shift with the co-living even, because in one point, I'm pretty sure we're all, feeling the same way, the people who are, working heavily on their computers. It's hard to diversify, work and relaxation time for sure at this point. I'm pretty sure this is, in a way that, a zeitgeist. So with this, being said, that means, co-working spaces was the pioneer of, for the future of work back in the day. It started out as, we don't need to be in the office to do our work. We can just go this, hip and more relaxed places instead of just staying here, and change the corporate culture all across the world. And now maybe we can, I know this is way off topic, but since I got you, I would love to, have your opinions on it. Do you see any, co-working space 2.0 going to happen, or co-working 2.0 going to happen, since maybe we are, coming to the end of the 1.0 with the crisis, and now, because corporates have to, come up with the solutions. They cannot have everyone back in their buildings, but they have to do something about it. So do you see any co-working 2.0 coming up with the aspect of, Antwork as well, and also the Lebanon too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a conversation for everyone attending, because you're either working in the profession of agri-food, or a business or a support platform for this industry, or owning or involved in retail spaces for food products, or food entrepreneurship. So actually the prospects for shared workspaces at different capacities, whether they're shared labs for work. So we're talking about music labs, food, shared communal kitchens, what was it, like maker spaces, these shared spaces for work,
Right.
that you use just when you need, by the hour, by the day, rather than just kind of owning all this asset that you're not using up to its capacity, 100% capacity. It's becoming more of the normal. Already we have seen this develop over the past 3 years, but moving forward, there is this kind of collective realization that workspace is not just for, fulfilling this 9 to 5 where everyone's just kind of in the same place sharing. I mean, yes, that there will not be any anything that replaces the organic sort of water cooler conversations, those human-to-human interactions that invite innovation. Things are more structured and more organized on the computer and digitally, but that will only be useful for a while. People will need to come out and engage. So the use of shared workspaces, I think, will presume it will just attract kind of a wider spectrum of audiences. Companies that were kind of renting out offices for their teams of 50 now will be comfortable taking up a space for, I don't know, a 10-person team, and people will be coming in and out of the office at different times.
Right.
Maybe they will give up the office entirely and will use shared meeting spaces, conference rooms. Retailers, perhaps right now is a conversation. Maybe retailers, especially in startup phase and early phases, don't want to invest in owning a full real estate retail space, but want to share it with other people. So we're also looking into shared retail space, and the concept of sharing. Yes, security and safety and sanitization related to the COVID-19 virus is going to be a precaution for the next 1 year, let's say. But as things develop, as social distancing kind of becomes a habit, and spacing and all of that, over time, yes, this will medically be addressed, but over time, yes, shared spaces will prevail and will be even more of a need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I'm imagining, you know, having, as you mentioned, you know, a team of 10 having their own, you know, space as part of this sort of like this co-working, you know, network. But that also creates, you know, new style of offices, new design, but it's also new kind of, you know, food consumption habits as well. Because, you know, when you talk about, you know, startup or small scale companies, you know, the food experience is usually like, you order something to the office or you go out, etc. But we're talking about, you know, big companies to shift that. And it would be interesting to see this, you know, food startups being involved to that change as well, and being catering the needs of the this kind of like a new workspaces. One of the startups that I've seen, I think they're based in US. I forgot the name, but they do corporate nutrition programs, which, you know, I find it quite interesting. But I was thinking, like, will that work in a scale? Like, would that make sense? But now we're talking.
Can you elaborate more on the idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the corporate nutrition program, what that means is that they, with the confirmation of the, you know, the workers in that team, they collect the DNAs, and they collect their, you know, sort of like their allergies and their needs, as based on their information they got from, you know, from the DNA, from the blood, and all these other samples, and they come up with a nutrition plan, just like a meal plan service that you would come up, you know, you would see around the world, and they cater specially for that person. So, you know, each lunch or each breakfast, they cater the food that you would definitely need based on the data that, you know, that company receive. Let's say, you know, you're allergic to, I don't know, like nuts and banana, but your body reacts well to grapes. So I'm just making stuff up. I don't know, are they related or not? But, you know, they cater you more food with focused on, you know, grapes and or wheat or this and that, because that helps Aisha to perform better. So with this way, they can, you know, the corporate can also, you know, help them to perform better. Because, you know, when you talk about, you know, offices and spaces, it's also about performing, you know, how you sit and what kind of a lighting do you have, what kind of a music, coffee, tea, etc. But what you put in your body as food or drinks, etc., that also affects your performance. So this corporate nutrition program startups, they're not unique, by the way. There are several.
It's very bold. It's very bold. I saw a comment from Sanim, and it is a very disputable when it comes to like freedom.
I know. It's a startup. I mean, it's not perfect.
I do want to have a banana even if I have an allergy. No, it's definitely plausible. Probably more for things like academic programs, healthcare institutions, programs that are sort of education for people with challenges. So these are like not a luxury; these are a necessity.
Absolutely.
So I think that has its position. For work, that's super high end and it's up and coming. I've heard of some bold suggestions in the Nordics of such initiatives. But what we've tried to do actually on food entrepreneurship and on engaging with engaging our users of the space, our coworkers, with food is definitely inviting a more colorful access to different kinds of healthy foods.
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of explored how to have like maybe micro greens and urban farming where people can kind of make up their own salads in the space. It's proved a little bit like high cost to set up, but worthwhile.
Right.
We discontinued with the partner for different challenges, but just kind of business hasn't been very easy in Lebanon in this period. But there are definitely a lot of things that kind of work with the work-life integration and in the food sector, because food is not just health, it's entertainment, it's pleasure, and it's a balance.
Absolutely. That's perfect. I mean, that's perfect. And that's a great, sign off. I was gonna say, is there anything you want to add since we're coming close to our time? But I mean, yeah, that was initially, as you mentioned, because there are, steps of that, when you talk about food, is it a luxury? Are we talking about the luxury part? Are we talking about need part? Are we talking about security part? So it has this all, aspects of it to be looked into. There's one more question from Sanam. All right, let me read that out. There's no problem. It's in the last minute. Are there any meaningful interventions related to food that are geared toward the refugee communities, either based in camps or live under poverty conditions? Is there any ongoing work or project that comes up to your mind when this comes up to a question in Lebanon? Do you want to, talk about that?
Hold on.
Sure.
I'm reading the question and I'm like kind of thinking of this, the ecosystem, the clusters. So actually, Sanim, thank you for the question. Right now, the main thing related to intervention across refugee camps has been just addressing the crisis and I forgot the word, but it's just addressing the food needs. Like there are big gaps in food needs. People just need basic food materials. I've heard of different startups addressing this, but across different things like access to clothes and shelter and healthcare. But for food, you're kind of picking my brain there, and I'll kind of look at it within the community. A lot of innovative ideas, especially at the university level, students participating in social entrepreneurship competitions and local competitions to address local crises and challenges. A lot of them address the refugee crisis. So I want to look at this. I think we have one of the guests who's a friend of mine, Hala, shout out to you, Hala, who works with different university students. I'd love to ask her for their entrepreneurship programs. I saw a comment, Sami. So Sanam, I'll get back to you. I'll leave that on the side for me. I have a comment from Tanya from Hong Kong.
Oh, all right.
And earlier. And Tanya, it's great to have you with us, and we would love to actually have your feedback in our conversation. And I'm asking, perhaps maybe this is the first time we're doing this, but perhaps maybe we can have a shared discussion to see the collective intelligence and insight that we can get from the room and better identify the direction.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. I was just checking, is she or he still here? Tanya's is I think
above Sana.
Awesome. Great. So Thank you so much for your time. I mean, this was again, this was as you mentioned, this is the first time we were doing it, but I mean, we covered the from the adaptations and the potentials, and also talked about the Lebanese ecosystem. I mean, we're quite excited to kick it off. As I mentioned, thank you so much for your time. Coming in and joining and starting the Agri-Food Connect and starting the global conversation that we're aiming to keep it going. And thank you so much for all of you attendees coming up, and thank you so much for your time. We will be sharing a survey after after when we finish off the webinar. As Aisha mentioned, we would love to have your opinion and feedback, and how we can improve, and how we can add your thoughts in the process. So thank you so much for everyone coming. Thank you so much, Aisha, for joining in. And
thank you.
So I'll see you next time.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. So have a great one. Take care.
You too. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.